Thanks, Barbara. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Susan Bishop. I am a mid-70s white woman. According to J.D. Vance, I'm a cat lady. Welcome to First Unitarian Church, where our mission is to explore the eternal, nurture community, and pursue the common good. We welcome you this morning in your brokenness and in your wholeness. No matter who you have been, who you are, or who you are becoming, we greet you today with love. I'd like to extend a special welcome to everyone who is watching us on the YouTube channel this morning. Please introduce yourself in the comments and let us know where you're calling us from. If you're in Oklahoma City, what neighborhood are you in, or if you're elsewhere, what city or town are you in? Throughout the summer, we are featuring guest and lay-led services. Today, our service is led by our affiliated community minister, Reverend Celeste LeBach. Welcome to First Unitarian Church. And now our prelude prepares us for worship. Wonderful. This morning is special because our chalice lighter this morning is Michelle Cernacker, and she is celebrating the big 6-0. Happy birthday, Michelle! Michelle lit our chalice in Midtown Oklahoma City on land that was home to First Americans, including the Apache, the Caddo, and the Wichita, on land that was taken from the Muskogee and the Seminole tribes, and other removed and relocated peoples. We light the chalice as a symbol of our sacred time together. The burning chalice represents the light of reason and science, the warmth of loving community, and the cleansing heat of justice and the flame of hope.
I'm going to invite you to pull out your hymnal in front of you and turn to 442. And for those of you who are hearing only, I am a white woman of average build with short purplish brown hair and round black glasses. And we are going to do 442, and I invite you to, if you are new to this congregation or new to Unitarian Universalism, Singing the Living Tradition is a fabulous resource. And so maybe during some of this wonderful music that you get to listen to, you can also peruse some of the readings that are in the back of the hymnal. But I like to hear your voices when I gather, and so if you would read the part in italics, I will read the first part, and we shall do our call to worship together. We bid you welcome, who come with weary spirit seeking rest. Who come with troubles that are too much for you, who come hurt and afraid. We bid you welcome, who come with hope in your heart. Who come with anticipation in your step, who come proud and joyous. We bid you welcome, who are seekers of a new faith. Who come to probe and explore, who come to learn. We bid you welcome, who enter this hall as a homecoming. Who have found here room for your spirit, who find in this people a family. Whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are on your journey, we bid you welcome. Amen. And with that, if you would join us in the opening hymn, number 134, Our World is One World.
I guess I forgot to say I'm also a white woman, and I'm wearing a floral shirt and a pair of yellow cropped pants. Gene Roddenberry was a visionary in that he imagined a universe of diverse cultures, visited by a crew of mostly human men and women on starships known by names like Enterprise and Voyager, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new civilizations, and to boldly go where no one had gone before was their primary mission. They carried with them all the knowledge from Earth, wrapped in the prime directive, which was to not interfere in the natural progression of cultures they encountered. I don't know if Gene was a Unitarian or not, but I think most of his crew was. Through the miracle of television and not knowing anything about Unitarian Universalism as a teenager, I was taught the first principle by Gene Roddenberry, to recognize and affirm the inherent dignity of all. I was also being taught that political discourse, while feverish at times, could occur when rational thinking people discussed the issues of the day and ways to make our country, our cultures, and our futures better. When Paramount took it off the air, I was one of thousands who wrote a letter begging them to bring Star Trek back. I was a Trekkie in the making. I remember one particular episode that I must admit, it left me crying. I think it was the E Pluribus Unum episode where resistance fighters were trying to overthrow a dictator, a former Starfleet officer, in fact, who had lost his way to greed and power. The people wanted the freedom to speak their minds, follow whatever spiritual path spoke to them, and to lift others up that were less fortunate, and to move their culture forward on paths of peace and prosperity. While an obvious reference to our own American Revolution, it showed that love of country and its guiding principles in the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution was honorable and just. Star Trek showed me diversity of life forms such as Klingons, Vulcans, Cardassians, not the Kardashians. Well, maybe. Cardassians, Talaxians, and so many more. While weaving wonderful stories, Roddenberry showed that other life forms were not to be feared. They were to be embraced. Characters like Lieutenant Uhuru, the first black officer aboard a starship, cracked more than glass ceilings, and Captain Janeway, the first woman captain of a starship, was my love fantasy. My wife knew, and she wasn't too concerned by my affections. Gene Roddenberry showed us through subtext the importance of diversity, inclusion, and equity in every episode for several decades. In many ways, all 7 principles can be found in the Star Trek series, either through subtext or out loud and proud. It was a series that seemed based on liberal theology, the foundations of science and reason, the flames of justice. Sound familiar? Well, now it's our turn. Not to go and create a wonderful, enduring television series, although that would be nice. But we are to engage with those who may not agree with us on political levels. Our ideologies may differ, but we are all at our core Americans. We cannot, and I cannot, assume the we versus them attitude, which only serves to solidify our differences. I stand by something I've said for a long time. We are more alike than we are different. And with the problems facing our country, we need everyone's input and assistance for what's lacking. Today, there's a grassroots energy that I have not seen since the 60s, where white, black, brown, women, men, lesbians, trans, gays, Protestants, Jews, Muslims, atheists, and so many more are taking to social media, to the streets, and to the ballot box with their support for a more equitable and inclusive America. The purpose is to save our democracy for everyone, not just the rich, not just for white men, but for everyone. So I challenge each of you this morning to examine where you are in the political scheme of things. Do you have energy and time to help register people to vote? Or become a poll worker with You the Vote? Or volunteer to rap on doors and engage with people? Can you transport souls to the polls come November? How else will we understand our differences if we can't speak and listen to each other with respect? We are at a crossroads in our American history, and while I'm scared, I'm excited as to the possibilities of our future together. Like I said earlier, our time is now, and we cannot go back to business as usual. It's time for us, as a people of faith, to side with love in all things and get involved. Thank you. And now, I have to turn the page. A lot of pages. It's time for our offering. Every Sunday, we take an offering. Since 2002, all the cash and designated checks from our offerings have gone directly to external nonprofit organizations doing good work, our Change for Change partners. For the month of August, our Change for Change partner is our Girl Scout troop number 3115 for the Klassen SAS Middle School Food Bank. Klassen SAS Middle School provides weekly and as needed food from their food bank to their own families and students. The regional food bank partners with Klassen SAS Middle School to accomplish this. Each year, the Girl Scout Troop 3115 provides the food for a Thanksgiving dinner for 10 to 20 families of the school. The troop members plan and deliver the special meal to each of the Klassen SAS middle school families that have requested this holiday. Our collection will be used to buy those Thanksgiving meals. For those of you who are in the sanctuary with us today, in just a moment, we will be passing the offering plate. And if you're watching us online, please make your gift by sending a check to First Unitarian Church and write Change for Change on the memo line, or make an online payment through our website, oneuc.org. Thank you. Do you need me?
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from the 1966 Ware Lecture, Don't Sleep Through the Revolution, delivered by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly in Hollywood, Florida, May 18th, 1966. I'm sure that each of you has read that arresting little story from the pen of Washington Irving entitled Rip Van Winkle. One thing that we usually remember about the story of Rip Van Winkle is that he slept 20 years. But there's another part in that story which is almost always completely overlooked. It is the sign on the inn of the little town on the Hudson from which Rip Van Winkle went up into the mountains for his long sleep. When he went up, the sign had a picture of King George III of England. When he came down, the sign had a picture of George Washington, the first president of the United States. When Rip Van Winkle looked up at the picture of George Washington, he was amazed. he was also completely lost. He knew not who he was. This incident reveals to us that the most striking thing about the story of Rip Van Winkle is not merely that he slept 20 years, but that he slept through a revolution. While he was peacefully snoring up in the mountains, a revolution was taking place in the world that would alter the face of human history. Yet Rip knew nothing about it, for he was asleep. One of the great misfortunes of history is that all too many individuals and institutions find themselves in a great period of change and yet fail to achieve the new attitudes and outlooks that the situation demands. There is nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution. And there can be no gainsaying of the fact that a social revolution is taking place in our world today. We see it in other nations in the demise of colonialism. We see it in our own nation in the struggle against racial segregation and discrimination. And as we notice this struggle, we are aware of the fact that a social revolution is taking place in our midst. Victor Hugo once said that there is nothing more powerful in all the world than an idea whose time has come. The idea whose time has come today is the idea of freedom and human dignity. And so all over the world, we see something of freedom explosion. And this reveals to us that we are in the midst of revolutionary times. An older order is passing away, and a new order is coming into being. The great question is, what do we do when we find ourselves in such a period? Certainly, the church has a great responsibility, because when the church is true to its nature, it stands as a moral guardian of the community and of society. It has always been the role of the church to broaden horizons, to challenge the status quo, and to question and break mores if necessary. I'm sure that we all agree that the church has a major role to play in this period of social change. you join me in prayer? Holy One, you who reminds us that we stand on the shoulders of giants, we come to you, our hearts aching for the dawning of a new age, where the world reflects the heart of this church we love, and the church reflects the beauty and diversity of the faces of this world. We come to you weary of cycles of oppression, the sins of our fathers that cry out from the soil of our nation, echoing even in the halls we call home. Their voices pulsing in our ears in discordant rhythm to our own heartbeats, pressing us forward to keep their dreams alive as we greet the challenges of the present day. We have been given unearned and irrevocable gifts to serve the highest good. Help us use those gifts to connect and not separate, to heal and not harm, to include and not divide, and to reconcile that piece of the oppressor which the harm of this world has planted within each of us, so that we might redeem ourselves and this nation. Holy One, we ask you to use us to end this cycle of violence, this generational curse, so that our children and our children's children and their children's children will look back at our next 100 years and not be ashamed of what we did or did not do. In the names of those known and unknown, present and absent, remembered and forgotten, in the names of all the helpers of humankind. Amen. I invite you to sing with us in your hymnal number 318, We Would Be One.
Join and sing.
be seated. Good morning. For those of you who do not know me, I am Reverend Dr. Celeste Labach, the affiliated community minister here of this church and the founder of the Restorative Justice Institute of Oklahoma. I have such a fondness for this church and its historic pulpit. This church founded in 1883, and for this congregation, it was here in 2006 that I actually preached for the first time in a city that I grew up in that allowed me to ultimately be called to All Souls in Tulsa, where I served as the first openly gay minister until 2015. I have been absent from this pulpit and your community more than I would have liked for a few reasons that I would love to explain. Last August, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. My doctoral defense was that September. Just track this timeline with me. August, I was diagnosed. September was my doctoral defense, followed by a surgery in October, graduation in December, and then a graduation ceremony in May, and my final surgery was less than 2 weeks ago. So, I'm glad to be here, and it feels like the beginning of a new era for lots of reasons, both personally and communally for me. But I've gone by many names in my life since my birth. I've gone through many nicknames and marriages and changes in status. And for those of you who know me as Tamara, you are not wrong. But I felt called after the trials and tribulations of the past year that a change in name was in fact in order. I have always loved my middle name, Celeste, and this felt like the perfect time to both step into it and emphasize it. And so no worries if you misname me, it's definitely not a dead name, but Celeste is my preference. If you are the kind of person who reads the newsletter, you may have seen my title, We Need a New King, which I chose before President Biden stepped out of the 2024 presidential race. And I was already keenly aware of the gendered language then, but if you will forgive my play on words, I knew you would forgive my play on words, as you learned more about my intent to discuss Martin Luther King Jr. a bit today. However, with the events of the past week, including former President Trump's suggestion that this is, quote, the last time people will have to rally to vote, end quote, I realize this title may have evoked something completely different in you. And with Kamala Harris being pushed into the front, it might have been even more appropriate for me to have named this sermon, We Need a New Queen. But I digress. Here we are in August of 2024, 58 years after Reverend Dr. King gave the Ware Lecture and 248 years since the birth of this nation. Whoever becomes president will lead us through the 250th anniversary celebration of what our forefathers and mothers dreamed and prayed would be a never-ending cycle of the peaceful transfer of power. A power that had checks and balances, ideally to prevent future tyranny. But just like the parenting of our own children, the potential of that new life is tested over and over by the unhealed parts of the parents and the community raising her. Let me say that again. Just like the parenting of our own children, the potential of that new life is tested over and over by the unhealed parts of the parents and community raising her. If we lead those children from our unhealed wounds, we merely transfer our pain to them and trap them in a cycle of violence. If we are able to heal our wounds, tell our story, and lead from our values, we share the learning, but remove the weight of our burdens from their shoulders. We lighten their load, so that they can meet the moment informed by the past and carry our values and their dreams inspired by our journey forward. Can you believe the resonance of the words of Reverend Dr. King to us in 1966? And here we stand in Oklahoma, still experiencing the birth pangs of racial inclusion of this nation 58 years later, and a tyrannical attempt to destroy public education across this country and also take away religious freedom. What can we do? How do we as a people of this free faith respond? David Brooks wrote last week in the opinion section of the New York Times that the task before us is to build a new cultural consensus that is democratic but also morally coherent. My guess, and it's only a guess, he says, is that this work of cultural repair will be done by religious progressives, by a new generation of leaders who will build a modern social gospel around love of neighbor and hospitality for the marginalized. That sure sounds like a call to task, doesn't it? I'm going to read it one more time because I think it's so important. The task before us is to build a new cultural consensus that is democratic but also morally coherent. My guess, and it's only a guess, is that this work of cultural repair will be done by religious progressives, by a new generation of leaders who will build a modern social gospel around love of neighbor and hospitality for the marginalized. Haven't we always claimed that we were trying to do that? So what's the problem? You may not know this, but Coretta Scott King said in an interview that she and Dr. King gave a lot of thought to becoming Unitarian at one time. And she said that they realized that we could never build a mass movement of black people if we were Unitarian. In a UU World article in 2002, my colleague, who happens to be of color, Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt, wrote, "In the end, King chose to forgo the liberal religious enterprise among Unitarian Universalists and leaned instead on the God who promised never to leave or forsake him even in death." She continues, "It was a statement that pierced my heart and troubled my mind then and now. I considered what our religious movement would be like if Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had chosen differently and had cast his lot with our faith instead of returning to his roots as an African American Christian. Certainly, no one with King's gifts would have lived in complete obscurity." McNatt says she realized, though, that our liberal religious movement would have neutralized the greatest American theologian of the 20th century. I mean, sit with that for a minute. That our liberal religious movement would have neutralized the greatest American theologian of the 20th century. It's a hard pill to swallow. But I have some ideas about why. I'm sure you would expect that. I believe that David Brooks is right. That what we need is a new generation of religious progressive leaders who will build a modern social gospel around love of neighbor and hospitality for the marginalized. But we are stuck in the same cycle that we were in 1966, creating a faith that still would have neutralized Dr. King if we cannot heal our own wounds, especially around religious and racial trauma. We are a predominantly white and Christian-averse group in Oklahoma, we Unitarian Universalists. But those are our historical burdens that continue through the ages because we have not yet healed our past. The world of 1966 Dr. King is describing has both changed and not changed. What about us? What about Unitarian Universalism? How have we made room for the new? And what have we done to heal so that our burdens do not overwhelm the next generation? So that they can move forward unhindered with their dreams and our values in this context. Now, I know that this church is making strides, so please do not see this as a finger wagging. This is about me as much as it's about all of you. This church is making strides by examining those who have been lifted up to name rooms in this building, for example. else can we do? For the pragmatists among us, Susan gave us simple and accessible ways to be able to get involved and do something now. But I would like to posit this morning that the first step to healing our past, both individually and collectively, is to be in relationship with it. Now, what does that mean? Well, first we have to know it. My beloved friend and colleague and historian, Dr. Carlos Hill, is here this morning with us. I love you, brother. He and I led and created 2 institutes, 3 actually, on significant Oklahoma history. One on the Tulsa Race Massacre, one on Julius Jones's wrongful conviction, and one on Clara Luper's legacy. All in relationship with the living or their descendants and their stories. So the first thing I would suggest to you is to learn your history. Know your history. Teach your history. Of your family, if you know it or can discover it. Of the systems of which you are a part, the city, the state, the country, the educational system that teaches your children, our children. The healthcare system that treats our wounded, the criminal justice system that enforces our laws. Don't depend on the educational system of an oppressive dynamic to extend the bar of knowledge that you are ascribing to. Don't depend solely on an external bar of knowledge set by a mostly wounded system. And now step 2. Be in relationship with your legacy burdens and legacy gifts. Many of you know that I am trained in this evidence-based therapeutic modality that is called internal family systems that has profoundly influenced my ministry, my social justice work, and the restorative justice model that my organization uses. What we know is that 3 generations at least of your DNA is actively influencing your experience for better or for worse. And that we can engage with these influences through the lens of our imagination and inquiry. There's a study that explains this very simply when it talks about mice that are exposed to pain and peppermint at the same time. And their children, never having experienced the pain but still smelling the peppermint, are frightened by the peppermint. Never having experienced the pain. And their children's children, 3 generations, also have the same experience. So having never even been in relationship with someone who actually experienced the peppermint and the pain, they had the experience aligned with it. Now, what does that mean? It means that parts of us, parts of our parents were in their parents when we were being created. So 3 generations back, we know it's actually true that there are connections there. And so the trauma that was experienced by your grandparents and your parents is in you. And we carry it around with us, unbeknownst to us, if we don't turn to what it could be. Now, interestingly, there's a lot of different ways to be able to be in relationship with our legacy burdens and our legacy gifts. We have gifts, too, of food and recipes and music and what you would consider to be culture, right? I know I have an example of whenever in my 20s and 30s, actually, well, even in my teens, whenever I moved to a new place, I always started a band. I wanted to be in a band. Why? It was home to me. No matter where I was, I knew that if I had a group of musicians, I had home. Why? Because my parents were musicians and songwriters. Because their parents were musicians and songwriters. And so I created that space for myself. That's a legacy gift, not a legacy burden. But when I found myself regularly, whenever I was stressed out, standing in front of my refrigerator and then zipping off to the grocery store to fill my pantry and fridge whenever I was stressed, I started to get kind of curious because I've never experienced food insecurity in my life. I've always had an option of 3 meals a day. Very privileged. And so when I did a little digging and did a little work, what I found out is that I am also carrying in my body not just food insecurity from 2 generations back during the Depression, But also at the core of my understanding is the potato famine and my Irish ancestors who actually immigrated to the United States so that they would have a different way of life. Is this all making sense? So does that mean that you have to know your ancestry tree and know? No, it doesn't actually mean that, which is what's so fascinating about internal family systems. It's helpful if you know that information, but it's not necessary. So as you know, I usually come and invite you to do something that's on the edge of a little uncomfortable. So take a breath, put your shoulders down. So I'm going to ask if you're willing, and all of this is optional. So if this doesn't feel good to you, remember I introduced the Singing of the Living Tradition, wonderful readings in the back of the hymnal. If you want to go there and check out for a bit, it's totally fine with me. But I'm going to guide you in a little bit of a guided meditation around your legacy. So I invite you to breathe deeply in through your nose and out through your mouth. And if it makes sense to you and you can sit straight to give some room for your organs, see if you can find your feet on the floor. And maybe feel where your body's being supported in the pew. And just take a minute to notice your biological body, your organs. I mean, can you even name all of the organs that work tirelessly for you? Your muscles, your bones, your tissues, your fascia, your skin, and all the ways in which they work together to keep you alive, your circulatory system, your lymphatic system, your immune system. And if it feels authentic to you, send some appreciation to your whole system for the way in which it works tirelessly and unconsciously on your behalf. And you can do that in a lot of ways, just with a thought of a thank you. Or if you're visual and you can actually see pictures in your mind, which by the way is a muscle that you can develop, maybe send the color of appreciation all through your body, whatever that color is for you. And now just take a moment to notice, if you know, even if you don't know, what you physically might have in common with your ancestors, even if you didn't know them. Maybe your bone structure, your facial structure, your hair color or texture. But even if you were adopted and your physicality hasn't had that kind of mirroring by other people you know, or it's been compared to people you're not related to, just offer some compassion to the parts of you that might have been frustrated by this. And if it feels right, see if you can offer some compassion to the parts of you that inherited traits that might be difficult for you to navigate, that have been with you for as long as you can remember. Maybe that's a queasy stomach that doesn't stomach rich or spicy food, or maybe you have back pain or hip pain like your family does, or small hands, or arthritis. Or maybe you were born with poor eyesight or allergies. Just think about all of those things that might have been passed down to you. And see if you can breathe yourself bigger than your biology, because you are more than the sum of your parts. And see if you can send some compassion to all that you've inherited, letting these parts know that you get it, that in some way these traits were passed down through the generations and trying to protect you in some way from the environment or maybe from some past generational trauma. And now see if you can imagine the highest selves. So these are not the personalities you met on earth, but the highest selves of the values of your ancestors. Those who did what they had to do and managed to survive over the centuries. See if you can imagine them, those who raised you, standing behind you. Even if they weren't blood related, all those who made your life possible. Allowing the highest selves of those who guided you to gather behind you. None of us makes it to maturity as human beings without a community, without support. And they say some 10 or 12 generations becomes around 5,000 or 6,000 people who potentially could be standing behind you. So take a moment to breathe and imagine that. And if you can see or imagine or feel that, can you give me a thumbs up so I can see where we are? And if you're not, offer some compassion to yourself for whatever's going on in your system right now. You don't know me, you don't want to be guided by me, your body's just not quite sure what to do. It's totally okay. But I'd like to invite you, if it feels authentic to those who are experiencing that crowd behind them, to, in your mind's eye, turn around and face them. And just see what you notice. And now, if it feels right, take a moment and update your legacy crowd. Let them know that it is August of 2024. And maybe let them know some of the things that they might be amazed by, things that might surprise your ancestors from 50 or 100 or 200 years before you. I am married to a woman, for example, legally in the state of Oklahoma. I drive a car. I can adjust my thermostat, etc. And if it feels authentic to you, offer them some appreciation for making your life possible. None of us arrived in this moment entirely alone, and just see how they respond. And if it feels right to you, invite a healthy and whole ancestor, somebody who might be interested in connecting with you today, to step out from the crowd. And just take a minute, if they do happen to do that, to notice them, any details you might see. And we're just building a connection, so you might invite them to tell you what they'd like to be called, so that if you want to continue to build this connection with them, you can, and see if they're willing to give you a response. First thing that pops up. And we're not going to do any work today in the group with these ancestors. We're just building a relationship, but if you have parts coming up trying to make logical sense of all of this, just welcome them. We're building a new neural pathway that reminds us that we did not arrive here alone. So you might just offer some appreciation to this ancestor for being willing to step out of the crowd and support you if it did, giving you an image to engage with, to differentiate from that crowd in the background, and see if there's anything that they need from you today. Ask them if they need anything from you, and see what you notice. And if it feels right to you, ask them if they have anything that they want you to know or to give you, that they would like to offer you before you close today, something that they think you might need right now in 2024. Could be an object or a symbol or a quality or just a sense. And if it feels right, you can offer some appreciation for that if you receive something, and maybe let them know that you're willing to come back to visit if that feels right. And then if you were able to actually track in this meditation, maybe offer some appreciation to your system for giving you the space to do this work. And if you weren't, that's okay. If you consider this to be a time of breathing and paying attention to your system and being with yourself, just let that be enough for today. And when you're ready, slowly begin again to feel your feet on the floor, the pew supporting you, the sound of the air conditioner, sound of my voice, and when it feels right, open your eyes. No matter what that was like for you, this idea of defying a dominant white culture construct that we are rugged individualists, you just took a step in that direction. And we must continue to use our imagination. Our culture is trying to force us to outsource our imagination, which prevents us from our own liberation. Our culture has lied to us and taken away our understanding of a human being that is always communal, never an independent solo actor. I would argue that we must continue even to dream. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream. That dream was a way to creatively imagine his own values being acted out in his context, in his time. And we must continue to dream. Maybe that was part of Rip Van Winkle's problem, actually. To sleep and not to dream. Now I have one more piece for you. And this might not be taken well in our current political climate, but look at the safety you've created so I can speak my heart. I feel so strongly about this key component that I'm going to be brave enough to risk speaking the truth, even if my own voice shakes, and even if it causes others to question who I am, where I belong, and what I believe. It is in this kind of differentiation where we speak our truth in those moments that we can move to better solutions for complex problems. Because if I speak my heart and my truth and you do too, now we're forced to have a conversation and a dialogue about it. Ideally, to reconcile. And here's the radical thing I want to say. We must reconcile our relationship with the Bible. It has been a traumatic one for many of us, and a long journey since our inception. I do not believe that the Bible should be in every classroom, so let me be clear. I do believe that as long as we allow Christian fundamentalists to define our culture and what the Bible means, then we are alienating a rich fabric of religious pluralism, humanism, and secularism that can also assist us in designing a new future to come. Karl Barth says, "The Bible is too important to be taken literally." All of the stories in the Bible are at the very least psychologically true. So I'm going to end this story with a story from the Hebrew Bible in Daniel chapter 3. It's a story that comes off the heels of King Nebuchadnezzar in his attempt to interpret a dream that he's had and calling on those with less power to interpret that dream for him. I mean, what are they supposed to say? In Daniel chapter 3, we hear the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 Jews who are rarely spoken about in a Unitarian Universalist context, who refused to worship the king or his gods and were cast into a fire by soldiers who were just merely following the king's orders. Now, of those who were cast in the fire, we often hear the story, if you have a Christian context, that the Jews saw a fourth man in the fire who resembled the Son of God, and the 3 escaped the fire unscathed. But I want to lift up a story of the ones who perished, of the story who continues to be so important from my perspective, the story of the soldiers. The ones who blindly followed the orders of the king are the ones who died in that fire. And yet the way in which the king interpreted the Jews having survived the fire was, oh, your God must be better than my God and more powerful than my God. And so the king missed the whole point and just chose their God to be lifted up as more mighty, and agreed that he would cut off the arms and legs of people who didn't agree with him. He did not learn from this story. He was still playing a game of whose God is better. Our free faith, our tradition, planted itself firmly that this is not the conversation, that there is in fact one light and many windows. And arguing around which window is the best to view to light is not helpful. We come from a tradition that blends universalist Christianity, Unitarian Christianity, transcendentalism, and humanism. Our work of inclusion is to heal the parts of us that are still trying to argue that one is better than the other, or argue which one of these windows is the right one. And even in our tradition, we dismiss some of our own people. Healing the parts of us is what will help us to demonstrate how to embrace our entire identity and history in the same way that we are calling the United States to do by healing its own historical wounds. So I claim my Universalist Christianity as a way to stay in the conversation, to not be ejected from those who try to exile me. And I invite you to stand proudly in a tradition that also came from Christianity and the followers of Jesus, and claim yourself to be a child of the light. This is part of what I believe we are being called to do as a religious progressive in lifting up a social gospel of loving our neighbor and including the marginalized. And it begins by including the parts of ourselves and our tradition that are in the margins. The most important part of Unitarian Universalist polity, that they could stand to learn a lot from us in the political sector, is that I have the freedom of the pulpit, but you have the freedom of the pew. I don't expect you to agree with me 100%. I expect that you will bring your understanding, your learning, your experience, your resistance to a conversation where we can celebrate our differences and come to a better decision together. Amen. Would you join me in closing hymn number 121, We'll Build a Land.
extinguish our chalice flame, but not the light of love and community which burns on in our hearts.
Go in peace. May you not forget the infinite possibilities that are born to you in gratitude and in hope. May you use those gifts that you've received and pass on the love that's been given to you. May you be contented knowing that you indeed are a child of God. Let this presence settle into your soul and allow your soul the something, where is it? Soul, the freedom. Allow your soul the freedom to sing and dance and praise and love. Go and be blessed and be a blessing. Amen.